Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books to keep your kids up at night. And I'm not 100% sure how to approach this book, because, first things first, I'm not really a big fan of it. It's not a terrible book, but I wasn't a really big fan of it. And there were some things that I didn't quite like about it, but upon doing a little bit of research into the book, I realized that I'm not quite alone in that. See, because this is the second half of the Bonechillers series, this is where we got more ghostwriters, and the ghostwriter of this book is David Bergantino. He's an interesting writer as far as I can tell, because he apparently wrote a novelization of the Nightmare on Elm Street, the new Nightmare novelization of that, and apparently people really loved it because the movie has a sort of meta aspect, and so he added that to the novel. And apparently that was enough to get him a few gigs, especially writing horror books. So there are 6 books in a fascinating Chapter Spook series. I'd love to get my hands on it, but apparently it's quite rare, which is Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror. There were 6 books in that, but he wrote 4 of them, so clearly people liked his ability to write these sort of Freddy Krueger tales. He also wrote 2 books in the Bard's Blood series. Well, I say 2 books. There's only 2 books in that series. There's Hamlet 2, Ophelia's Revenge, and A Midsummer Night's Scream. So this guy definitely has the chops to write horror. He's done it a few times. Also, I mentioned in the last episode that one of the authors fought for his right to have his name on the books, and that was David Bergantino. He said he wouldn't accept the contract unless he could get credit for his writing, and that's why the authors' names are on the inside cover. Now, whilst this is the second book, and the first book does have that ghostwriter's name in the front cover, apparently this book was technically written first, but because it had so much editing that needed to be done on it, apparently, it was released second. But that editing is part of why this is an odd book, because, like I said, I'm not a big fan of this book. There's some big issues with some plot holes. I'm not a big fan of the ending exactly, like it's not dreadful, but apparently the whole second half of this book was rewritten by editors who themselves aren't credited, and David Bergantino himself said that he wasn't fond of the fact that they changed it, even though the book's main plot itself was a little bit thin. So on the one hand, I am glad that the author agrees with me. Although this is not meant for the author, I'd like to think that if any of the authors who wrote these books listened to the podcast, they'd at least be able to go, oh, okay, yeah, that's a fair enough sort of... that's a fair critique. So I'm glad that he seems to agree with me that this book is a little bit not terrible, but But also, my biggest complaints aren't because of bad writing, they're because of bad editing. I'll still summarize and analyze this the same as I have the other books, that's not going to change, but I may mention offhandedly when it's most likely the editing in the second half of the book as opposed to the author. But 2 things I have to mention right off the bat, because it really does bug me. And my 2 main issues are right there in the title. First of all, it's called Night of the Living Clay, but the book takes place entirely during the day. And I don't understand why. It's a simple fix. Nothing in the plot relies on it being daytime. Set the book at night. And yeah, I recognize that it's a reference to a B-movie, that like a lot of these things do, but I also don't care. If you call your book Revenge of the Banana Skins, your book better have banana skins in it, and they better have vengeance upon someone. And my second issue is this book's called Night of the Living Clay, and I don't understand why you'd choose clay as your main monster. At first I thought the issue was that clay isn't scary, but on reflection that's just not true at all. I mean, I don't find turkey scary, I don't find bugs scary, and yet I enjoyed those books, and I found that they had some creepy moments, so you could probably make clay scary, but I think the issue is that clay is literally a formless lump. There's nothing really in and of clay that makes sense as a monster. Everything that makes clay interesting is what you put into it, because it's literally just kind of slightly wet, claggy dirt that you get from the ground. And so my real issue isn't that it's not scary. It can be scary. Like I said, there's a lot of things in the ground that are creepy. I mean, that's why we put bodies after all. No, my issue is that clay doesn't really have anything in it thematically that you can build a story from. And from reading this story, I can't help but feel like it's proven me right. And to show you why that is, I think we might just have to get into it. So, this is Bonechillers number 12, Night of the Living Clay. Our story begins and we're introduced to our main character, Tasha. She's down in the basement creating a clay figurine in the shape of a clown. Apparently, she really loves creating things with clay, and her parents think she's got some talent because they've created a little makeshift studio in the basement. But Tasha is not in a good mood. The only reason she's down here is because her parents have gone off to the flea market. She'd love to join them, or heck, even invite one of her friends over, but she can do neither because she has to be at home taking care of her brother who's sick, and she can't invite anyone else over because he might get them sick as well. As if on cue, Corey calls down asking for her to get him something to eat. She's annoyed because she knows that he could probably just make soup or something, so she goes up to tell him as much, but he's standing at the top of the stairs wearing just pajamas and complains that what he really wants is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They head to the kitchen and she starts making him a sandwich when the front door rings. Tasha goes to answer it, but the person there is already left. She can see them through the window heading back into their windowless van, and they describe him as having long greasy hair, sunken in eyes, and being quite heavy-set, looking quite creepy. So she opens the door and sees that there's a small package about the size of a loaf of bread in brown paper with twine around it, waiting on the doorstep. Now, I don't usually focus on the contrived chapter scares. I think I mentioned a few in the first book, but I decided it wasn't interesting to talk about them every time. But this one is so bad. So what happens is she leans down, apparently hears a ticking noise, and then is convinced that it's a bomb. And so she grabs the parcel, she starts yelling at her brother to run because they're in danger, and then she wants to go hide it or something, but he's fighting over it and she's scared until it rips open and then the clay falls out. And it annoys me because there's no explanation for where this ticking sound came from, and it's never brought up ever again. I don't understand what this is all about, and they spend 2 pages on her trying to run around with this quote-unquote bomb, even though that makes no sense. You can't blame the editors on that one, David. This one's all you. But like I said, they've torn open the packet now, and this green, slightly greyish-looking clay falls out in a big lump. Apparently, Corey is a little bit jealous that his sister gets so much attention for being an artist, so when he saw this creepy clay in a little token in the back of a comic book, he convinced his dad to cut it out and send it in, and apparently, even though these comic books are ancient, the company must still exist because they sent him this quote-unquote creepy clay. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this because it doesn't actually change the story, but they did sort of miss a trick here because there's literally a kind of clay called monster clay, and it's called that because apparently it has the oils in it which allow you to form it into really creepy looking smooth skin. Now, because he bought it from an ad in the back of a comic book, Tasha's a bit worried that this is some sort of a scam, so she asks if she can see the clay, and we really see how jealous Corey is, because the idea of her touching his clay makes him say, no, this is my clay, but she insists, no, I just want to see it. So she picks up a chunk of clay, taking it out of the packet, and I love the way it's described. It says that it feels like spoiled raw hamburger meat in her hands, grossly wet and squishy, and she swears that she can also see little white specks in the green that look like squirming maggots. It almost feels like they're crawling over her hand, so grossed out, she drops it on the floor. When Corey sees this, he just thinks that she's mistreating his clay, so he picks it up and tells her to not touch his clay, and he's going to use it to make something that's even better than the stuff she makes. So Corey goes upstairs to his room, and Tasha goes downstairs to the basement, and both start busily humming away working at their clay. Shortly after, Corey calls down to her, and at first Tasha's annoyed. She thinks he just wants more attention, he wants more food, but it turns out no, he wants to show off his clay figures. "I'm sorry I was being so selfish before," he told her haltingly. The apology almost made Tasha's jaw drop. "I think it's 'cause I'm sick," he continued. "But I feel better now, and I made lots of cool stuff with my creepy clay." He paused for a moment and looked at his feet. "Do you want to see?" "Of course," Tasha told him instantly. "I'll come up and see what you've made." She started to rise from her chair. "I'll bring them down," Corey said quickly, stopping her. "I wondered if I could set them out to dry down here." He shuffled his feet. "If you don't mind." Tasha smiled. Sometimes Corey could be so cute. "Okay then, I'll wait here," she said. She saw a flicker of excitement in Corey's eyes before he whirled and rushed up to his room. When he returned, he placed the figures he had made on Tasha's drying table with great care. "What are they?" she asked politely, as she eyed the lumpy, misshapen objects. Corey introduced each one as if it were a friend he had just made in school. First he pointed to something that looked a little like a bird. "This is a pterodactyl," he said, "a flying dinosaur I saw in my computer program." He offered her the pterodactyl, but Tasha didn't hold it or even touch it. Suddenly she was afraid. Would touching the clay give her that same gross feeling again? I don't want to drop it, she said. This is Otto the octopus, he explained, holding up a blob with 7 small legs coming out of it. Tasha didn't point out that octopuses have 8 tentacles. She just smiled appreciatively. Corey was encouraged and ran through the last 3 quickly, pointing to each one. There's a scorpion, a snake, and a vicious space alien. The last figure looked vaguely human and was bulky and had a mouth full of knobby teeth. The teeth looked like soft, rounded pyramids. Tasha noticed that the snake was just a rope of clay. Corey had rolled it in his hands and left a slightly bigger blob on one end for a head. They're all very nice, she said. You really like them? Corey beamed. Yes, I do, Tasha told him. She could tell that her brother had worked hard on each of the clay creatures. I'll leave them down here and soon they'll be dry. Corey was hopping around with excitement. Sure, Tasha said. The drying table was behind her workbench, so she wouldn't have to look at the weird half-formed green-grey creatures while she did her own artwork. Okay, he said. I'm going to watch TV. You want to come? Nah, Tasha shook her head. I want to finish what I'm working on. I'll come up when I'm finished. Okie dokie for Noki, Corey replied, then bounced back up the stairs. As usual, I do like some of the characterization between the siblings here, because Corey is annoying, at the same time he's a younger brother, and sometimes he can be a bit cute. I do like stuff like that, although it does seem to flip-flop a little bit. It's not entirely consistent. Either way, our girl is downstairs. She's working on her model clown when she hears scuttling behind her. And her first instinct is that there's rats in the basement, so of course she goes running up the basement stairs, and Corey's up there, and when she says that there might be rats in the basement, he thinks, oh cool, I want to see some rats. But when she says, no, you don't want to go see some rats, they could be dangerous, they got diseases, he then insists that he wants to go in the basement anyway because he wants to look at his creeps. Even though he put them down there like less than a minute ago, but whatever, he's a kid, maybe he doesn't understand how long it takes to dry clay, especially when you're air drying it like this. So he heads downstairs and he immediately sees that his creeps are gone. Tasha wonders if maybe the rats bumped the table, maybe made them fall off, but Corey immediately assumes that Tasha has gotten rid of his creeps. She's taken them and hidden them somewhere. And this is what I'm talking about, the characterization. He starts then by doing a sing-song saying that she did it because she's jealous that the parents were like his models better, and so he's doing this whole Tasha's jealous, Tasha's jealous. And then when she goes upstairs, he then starts pointing, accusing, give them back, I want my creeps back. And then he goes upstairs and he's watching television. And look, I know kids can have simpler emotions, but this kid seems to flip-flop back and forth with either no memory of what happened, or he seems to turn on a dime. It doesn't feel realistic to me, at least from the friends and family I know at that age. Either way, Tasha doesn't have to deal with this. She, again, is on the Corey is annoying train, and so she decides to call her friend on the phone. So she calls up her friend Wanda, and they talk a little bit about how she wants her to come over, but Corey's probably still infectious, and then the line gets cut. But no time to dwell on that, because she then hears a crash from downstairs. Tasha runs downstairs, and she sees that one of the figurines that she once made a little ballerina figurine, put a lot of effort into it, her parents loved it, and so they kept it and put it on display, and now it is smashed on the floor. Assuming he smashed it to get revenge on her quote-unquote stealing her creeps, Tasha calls for her brother, and she hears a flush. He comes out of the bathroom, and she starts accusing him, saying, I didn't steal your creeps, I can't believe you did this. Corey defends himself by saying that, no, he wouldn't do that, and he was just in the bathroom, so he couldn't have done it. And whilst Tasha's still upset, Corey then goes and gets a paper bag and starts picking up the pieces, and Tasha quickly realizes that he's not acting like he broke it. Now, the main thing that's relevant for the plot is apparently some pieces of the ballerina are missing. So they then hear another crash from downstairs in the basement. They go check, see that the door's open, and when Corey confirms that he didn't go anywhere near the basement, they head downstairs and see that something has gotten into the clay. Not only is the clay clown figurine missing, but several of the packets of clay that were wrapped up in cellophane have been torn open, and it looks like something has been eating it, which, of course, Tasha assumes has been the rats. Before they can even react to this, something green runs out from the bench, attacking Corey and running away, and he yells out that he's been bitten. So Tasha goes into protective sister mode. She picks him up, takes him up to the bathroom upstairs, and before even checking the wound, apparently she pours some peroxide on a little cotton wad, and she's getting ready with bandages. But when she looks at his leg, she sees that although he was been attacked by something, there's just a little red welt, but it's surrounded by clay. Once he learns that he's not actually injured, Corey then says that he wants a can of Coke and he wants to play a video game with his sister. So he races out of the bathroom to get started on that. See, this is what I'm talking about with this kid. He was watching television before, now he wants to play a video game. But rather than complain about this for the rest of the story, my headcanon is that he has undiagnosed ADD. As they head towards the lounge room, Tasha and Corey notice there's a large patch of green that's on the carpet. Described as looking like melted frog skin, which is a fun, gross little description there. And then when they go to the kitchen, before they can do anything, basically, Tasha gets attacked by what looks like a misshapen green bird. She heard the thing croak hoarsely in her ear. All at once, something heavy fell against the top of her head, and she felt knobby paws tear furiously at her hair. Tasha almost gagged as she breathed in the thick, sickly sweet odor of the attacking creature. She reached back and grabbed it as hard as she could. Her fingers slid into a squirming, mushy mass. With a yank, she pulled the creature away, tearing out some of her hair with it. She flung it out into the hallway with all her strength. Corey slammed the kitchen door shut seconds after Tasha had hurled herself into the room. A loud thump sounded as the creature flew into the closed door. Tasha looked up at Corey. His eyes were still large. Now it was amazement that shone from them as he gazed at her. Whoa. His voice was almost a whisper. Instinctively, Tasha's hand went to the back of her head, where that thing had attached itself. Her hair felt slick. With slime, she wondered? Then she gulped. Blood. Holding her breath, she brought her hand around. It was covered with clay. What's going on? Her voice was trembling. Her breath came in short gasps. It was my pterodactyl, Corey announced. Huh? The pterodactyl I made out of the creepy clay. No way. Tasha shook her head in disbelief. Big yes way, Corey insisted breathlessly. It was awesome. It came from upstairs and was really flying. I mean, I was scared at first, but wow. You're nuts, Corey. Her brother was obviously scared out of his wits. It's just a bat loose in the house. It must have gotten into your clay upstairs. Get real, he laughed. Bats and rats at the same time? And you think a clay monster is flying around in the living room? Who needs to get real this time? I'll show you. With that, he turned and started to open the kitchen door. Tasha almost tackled him. No, I'm not going in there, and neither are you. An angry sparkle showed in Corey's face. I bet none of your sculptures ever did anything like that. Duh, they're clay. That doesn't happen. Maybe, he said. But if it did, wouldn't you feel dumb? Then you'd just have stinky little statues, and I'd have... He searched the air, looking for the right word. Magic. I'm gonna cry so hard, Tasha told him, filling her voice with fake hurt, when they cart you away to the loony bin. If you're so sure, he jeered, then why don't you go into the living room and look? You're not afraid, are you? Sure I am, she admitted easily. Of a bat, not a stupid clay pterodactyl. It's not stupid, Corey glared at her. If it was, it wouldn't have known to go after you. Tell you what, she didn't want to argue about this anymore. Let's just go next door. When Mum and Dad come home, we'll all take a look at your pterodactyl. So our monsters are attacking. I mean, one of them obviously tried to bite Corey in the basement, but now we can see them as they are getting bold enough to attack up in the house. And technically, I do like how the argument feels like a realistic argument between a slightly older sibling with a younger one. I still think even Tasha feels like she doesn't make emotional sense entirely, but maybe it's just because it's undercutting the tension that it kind of bugs me. Corey is still teasing her that he thinks his clay figurines are so much better than Tasha's because they can move, but Tasha's just trying to ignore him and just go to the neighbor's house so that they can wait there until their parents get home. But as they head for the back door, glass shatters on the wall beside her, and she turns to see that another one of his figurines, the little alien clay figurine, is standing on the kitchen bench, and it's throwing glasses at them. It's clearly trying to stop them from getting out of the door. Our kids also notice that he's slightly bigger than the little figurine that Corey originally made, and he's looking a little bit more defined. He's got sharper teeth. He now has color on his skin a little bit, like some specks on its head. This thing then jumps into the kitchen sink and starts throwing knives at the kids. Like, it says that it throws a few, some of them even get stuck in the wall, And when the kids are like, oh, at least he can only throw one at a time, of course, that's just a comedy setup, because he then starts throwing volleys of knives, like I said, like dozens of knives at a time, start flying towards the kids. In fact, one of them even hits Corey in the chest. It's a good fake out, though, because it hits him with the handle. But, that's like, sorry, this thing is throwing knives at these kids. It's trying to kill them. But Corey then is insistent that, like, he's the one who made it. He's like, it's dad. It should like him. Maybe it's just scared. He picks up a silver platter and runs at it, stopping the utensils from hitting him, using the platter as a shield. And when it runs out of knives, starts throwing spoons. And on a side note, how many freaking utensils are there in the kitchen sink? These kids need to do the dishes if there's this much stuff in the sink. But anyway, the point is, the thing starts running out of knives and things to throw. And so Corey puts down the platter, and he sort of cooingly, softly, as though approaching a wild animal, was like, hey, it's okay, we're not here to hurt you. Look, I'm your friend, see? And he slowly picks up the alien in his hand, and he turns to his sister to say, see, look, it was just scared. It didn't want to... And then he screams, because, of course, the thing bites him, and it, like, shakes his hand in pain and flicks the thing off his hand, because, of course, this thing is trying to kill them. It's not his friend. Thankfully, the thing is dazed enough that they have enough time for Tasha to help her brother wash his hand under the sink, to stop any kind of infection, I guess. I also like that Tasha uses this as a teachable moment to say, look, this thing is obviously trying to hurt us. It's not an animal. It's not a toy or a pet. It's dangerous. And Corey seems to understand that. But I think he might understand that a little too well, because his response is to open the utensil drawer, grab a potato masher, and then run at the alien. And I thought that was pretty clever, using a potato masher against a clay thing. I was wondering what would happen. But what happens is that the alien can run a lot faster than Corey. So even though it was a bit dazed before, it sees him coming at him, it dodges, grabs the potato masher, and then starts chasing the kids with it. And they run away, but as they get to the door to try to escape out the back door again, the alien beats them. It swings the masher at the door and cracks off the door handle. So they are now trapped in the kitchen with this thing. They decide to run into the living room to escape from this alien creature. Corey is, of course, worried that the pterodactyl is in there, but Tasha thinks that maybe because she threw it against the door, maybe it'll be dazed, and so they won't have to fight it. So they head into the living room and close the door. Now, this is actually one of those plot holes I was talking about. If you remember very distinctly in that excerpt, and also when the pterodactyl first attacked, the entryway and the kitchen were beside each other. But now suddenly there appears to be a living room with two doors locking off the kitchen and the entryway between those two rooms. I didn't notice this exactly when I was reading it, but something felt off. But I'll talk about this more at the end. What matters is that now the kids are in the living room, they hear something moving in the red velvet couch, and they see that for some reason it looks wet. So it turns out the pterodactyl was in the couch, because suddenly it bursts out and it flies at them. And just like the alien, this one's bigger than before, and it's starting to get more details on its skin. And the kids are trying to escape the front door as this thing is attacking. And this is another plot hole, although I'm not going to wait to the end. This one needs to be addressed now. So remember that stupid chapter scare I mentioned before, how they open the door, they think it's a bomb, and so she tries to run and throw the bomb thing away, or whatever stupid thing. The important thing is that she was focused on the bomb. She clearly did not lock the door, and yet in this scene, somehow the front door has two deadbolts that they need to unlock and unlatch before they can open the door, slowing them down before the pterodactyl attacks them. Now, technically this book is exactly 100 pages long, and this is page 53 where this is happening, so maybe the issues with the living room and the suddenly locked front door, maybe these are issues with the editor. But no matter who is to blame, this is a mistake in the book that makes it more annoying to read. So, because the front door is deadbolted, the pterodactyl gets to the door before they can open it, sort of sitting on the handle, and attacks them. And Corey tries to throw some things at it, but he accidentally breaks the glass in the window, and the pterodactyl takes this as an opportunity to escape through the front. So it sneaks through the window. I like how they mentioned that because it's so big now, it has to flatten itself down, squish its clay a little bit so it can get through the window. But the important thing is, now it's outside waiting for them. So the back door has no handle, and the front door has a pterodactyl waiting to attack if they ever open the door. The kids are 100% trapped inside. The kids decide the safest place to go is upstairs, so they head up the stairs towards the bedrooms, and there's a little moment where Tasha's sort of, in her head, she's blaming Corey for this, because, he was the one who made the clay figures. But she quickly decides, no, it's not good to be blaming him. We're both in this situation now. He didn't know that was what was going to happen when he made the monsters. And then, apparently, that's enough to give her an idea. Corey's eyebrows furrowed with worry. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I'm going to make something with your clay," she answered. Corey's jaw dropped open. "No! Come on, Corey, this was never a contest, and I think I might just have an idea of how to end this whole nightmare." "How?" "We'll fight clay with clay. I'll show you. Come on." She opened the door. The hallway looked empty, but they already knew that the pterodactyl could hide itself. Corey hesitated. "We have to stick together, Corey. If we're quick enough, we'll make it, I promise." He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. Closing the door behind them, they rushed to Corey's room. The creepy clay package lay open on the bed. The grey block was beginning to glow with a faintly greenish tinge. One end looked like it had been gnawed on, and a big piece was missing. "Uh-oh," Corey looked around the room nervously. There was a spot of slime on the floor near the closet. To be safe, Tasha closed the closet door, making sure she heard the click of the latch. If something was in there, it would have to turn the knob to get out, and so far, none of the monsters had managed to do that. "Okay, here goes nothing," Tasha said. She sat on the bed and tore a big chunk of creepy clay from the block. The oily substance seemed to seep into her fingers. Again, she smelled that sickly sweet odor, but she grasped the clay firmly in her hands. "It really feels like I'm holding a swarm of maggots," she thought. "Did you feel a little weird when you were working the clay this morning?" she asked her brother. "A little," Corey admitted quietly. As they spoke, a lithe figure was taking shape in Tasha's hands, with thin arms that stretched over a delicate head. "I always try to think good thoughts when I'm sculpting," Tasha told him. "I believe that whatever thoughts I'm thinking go into the figure I'm making, good or bad." "That's silly," Corey said. "Silly?" Tasha shot back. "Hadn't we just had a fight when you went upstairs to play with this stuff?" "Yeah?" Corey looked confused. "I bet you weren't thinking very nice thoughts, were you?" Corey shook his head slowly. "I didn't think so. Maybe because you were angry and you made monsters, they became evil, and this time they came to life." "No way," Corey shook his head angrily. "I wanted those monsters to be the coolest. I never wanted them to hurt anyone." "Well, anyway, since I'm pretty good at this," Tasha tried to stop herself from saying it, but it was too late. She saw Corey wince. "I just mean that since I'm not mad at you right now, and since I like making happy figurines, maybe I can make a nice creature." "Oh, great," Corey sneered. "Then what, you, me, and a moving clay dancing girl could be trapped in the house? What good is that?" "Because, dork brain," Tasha continued, "if it works, the good figures will protect us from the bad ones. Got it?" Corey laughed harshly. "That's great. Are you going to make little army men?" He started to pace. "How about little angels?" Tasha felt her face heat up. "Do you have any better ideas?" she snapped. She was almost done with the figure, so she breathed deeply and tried to control her anger. She didn't want to turn this ballerina into a monster too. To her relief, Corey shook his head. "Okay then, let's see what happens." She placed the finished ballerina at the center of the bed, and the two of them knelt on the floor, watching. "I wonder how long it will take." Now that's just a fake out. At first it doesn't seem to work, and the kids start to think of a plan of like climbing down the window or something, but then the little dancing ballerina starts moving. And it starts moving towards them, dancing gracefully, when its eyes apparently start glowing an evil violet, and then its fingers grow long claws, and it starts dancing in herky-jerky, dangerous, and yet still strangely graceful movements as it gets closer and closer and leaps towards the children. The children get saved at the last second because, unbeknownst to them, the clay snake was hiding under the bed the whole time, and when the ballerina gets close, it leaps out and attacks it to eat it. So clearly, whatever the kids make with this clay, it's the clay itself that turns it evil, not what the sculptor was thinking. Which I think it's an interesting idea in and of itself, although I still find it weird and kind of annoying that that's their first plan to fight the monsters. I guess technically the first plan was Corey grabbing the potato masher, but still, that could have worked if he was a bit quicker. I'm surprised that they're going straight to, let's make more of these things. Anyway, they head downstairs. Apparently the pterodactyl's there, so they have to run from the front entryway to the kitchen, and they see that the alien's there, although this is getting a little repetitive, going like, oh, the thing's here, let's run. But at least in this scene, just before the alien attacks, they've apparently found it mid-shed. If you remember how we saw some green, like, frog skin in one of the rooms before, whenever these things get bigger, they shed their skin and then grow. And so they see the alien, looks like it's melting because it's got this stuff peeling off it, and it's like hiding in a corner behind the fridge. Like how some wild animals will find a cozy place when they're vulnerable, like when a cat's pregnant, it'll find a place to have its kittens. But after using a broom to pull it out from behind the fridge, because the kids don't understand what's going on, the rest of this stuff peels off the alien and it grabs the broom and it attacks them. So the kids go running towards the basement, and they see something, like a long, flicking snake-like tail flicking through the basement stairs, and they manage to run through and avoid them. And both the kids decide that whilst that could have been the snake, it doesn't make much sense that it would get down here so quickly, so it was probably the octopus that's hiding under the stairs. And when they're down there, they see that the rest of the clay is missing, and this is when the kids finally seem to realize that the reason the clay is missing is because these monsters are eating it. Just then, a giant scorpion comes out from the shadows to attack the kids, and I was a little confused. I had to actually go back and reread the scene because, yes, one of the monsters the kid made was a scorpion, but apparently it just never left the basement, and I completely forgot about it until it reappeared in this scene. But before it can attack them, our girl gets an idea. Tasha grabs one of the bricks that are left. There's only like 3 or 4 bricks left on the table at this point. She grabs a clay brick and throws it at the scorpion, and it manages to distract it because it stops and starts eating it with its weird little scorpion mouth. But then the kids see in full that after it eats this stuff, it then sort of goes into a little slightly dormant state, and the kids get distracted watching as suddenly the skin peels off, that green frog-like skin, and the whole thing seems to inflate like a balloon, and then very quickly starts attacking them once again. So the kids go through that whole scene again. This time they plan that she'll throw the thing at it, and then when it's dormant, Corey will run up the stairs, and she'll follow shortly after. So they do it again. They throw the brick in front of the scorpion. It stops, starts eating it. Corey starts running up the stairs. But as Corey's climbing up the stairs, one of Otto's tentacles wraps around his leg, and Corey falls. But when he falls down the stairs, Corey falls onto the scorpion, but he falls onto its tail, causing the stinger to stab into the scorpion's own flesh, and then it basically just starts melting in front of them. The octopus attacks them again, whipping its tentacles, and Corey backs away, not wanting to trip on it again, but instead he trips on the hose that's in the basement and falls down. But this gives Tasha the idea to use the hose to wash away the clay creatures, and I have to find it pretty funny that literally the way they find a way to stop these monsters is by Corey tripping twice. But as silly as that is, it does actually work. Tasha grabs the utility hose and sprays it at Otto the octopus, and he just starts turning from clay into wet, oversaturated mud. He just sloughs and turns into a puddle in front of them. So now they've got their weapon to stop these monsters. They unwind the utility hose as much as they can, and they head up to the stairs, but the alien's right at the top of the stairs. It throws the door open, so, of course, he gets a face full of water, so she blasts him in the face. And then the pterodactyl appears as well, and it's a little bit silly, but I appreciate that they do explain it. It says the pterodactyl comes down, and when it sees the melting alien, it bites into him to eat some of the clay, and it looks like it's looking towards the basement, and so the explanation is that because they are eating the clay, they can smell the clay now, and they want to eat it, and that's why they're coming towards the basement. So I appreciate that, just a little bit, so it's not so contrived. Before she can fully melt down the alien, the pterodactyl swoops in and attacks it. She has to dodge as it's down in the basement, and so she also floods it with water, thankfully weighing it down so it can't keep flying, and it basically ends up melting down into nothing. And then they see in the claggy, wet mud in the basement, something is moving, something's flicking, which apparently is the snake that got down here at some point. We don't mention when, but because it's basically on the ground, they waste no time in soaking it up as well. They've totally turned everything into mush, except for that alien. It's still wandering around up there, its head falling apart, holding it together. So they go upstairs to spray the alien, but it's left and it's gone into the kitchen now, so the kids can't go spraying a hose through the house. And even if they wanted to, they do say that the hose isn't long enough. So they then hear the front door ring, and the kids race into action. Tasha gets a bucket, like the mop bucket, and Corey has turned on the water. They fill up the bucket as quickly as they can, and they head towards the front door. Because they can hear the alien fumbling with the doorknob. Apparently, they must have learned to open door handles in the intervening time. So they run to the front entryway, where the door opens, and she sees her friend Wanda standing there. And she barely gets to say anything when she sees this alien that tries to attack her, but they stop it immediately. She throws the bucket of water, splashing her friend with water, and then turning the thing into slop and covering her with muddy clay. So that's basically the story. It's basically over. The kids work together to clean up the mess. Wanda wouldn't have believed them if not for the fact that she'd just seen an alien try to attack her and then melt in front of her. But they clean up the house as best they can. They claim that they cleaned it up perfectly, although I'd argue that some of those knives did get stuck in the walls, so I don't know how they cleaned that up. Oh, and they also mentioned that the front glass in the front door was broken, but they're like, you know what, we're willing to accept that if it means that we don't get in trouble for having a war inside of the house. But of course, the story ends when their father gets home, and he is unusually excited because apparently he found something he's always wanted. See, when he was a kid, he always wanted to get creepy clay, but his mother said that he couldn't because she thought it was a scam, like a lot of the stuff in those old comic books. But when he was at this place, not only did he find creepy clay, he found something called super creepy clay, with extra creepy. And he was so excited, he even made something in the car on the way home, and he shows the kids this two-armed, two-headed monstrosity that he made. So the story ends on one of those here we go again type cliffhangers. The end. Okay, so I hope now you can see what I'm saying when I say that this is kind of I hesitate to say that it's bad. Like, I really don't like the characterization of the kids, because whilst they sometimes get along, sometimes don't, like the flip-flopping doesn't make sense to me. Also, the plot holes. It is obvious that whoever was writing the second half of the book didn't realize the structure of this house, because there clearly was not a living room until the second half of the book, when suddenly, instead of being in the kitchen, the thing was in the living room, even though from what it sounded like earlier, she passed by the living room to go upstairs, like passed by it, not going through it, through the kitchen, you know, during that scene when her brother's watching television. It makes no sense for it to suddenly be added there. I find it really annoying, especially because as I was reading the story, it just felt off. But if I'm perfectly honest, I didn't realize that it was a plot hole until I had to sit down and think about it for this episode, because it just felt off. It felt wrong. I couldn't quite put into words why, and it's only after looking through it again for this to summarize it, I realized that they added an extra room. But that's no excuse for the deadbolts on the door, though. That makes zero sense. It literally goes against what an earlier chapter said happened. But it's also not really a writing issue. Like, the reason I do all this stuff is because I think that you need to learn about different ideas for writing and different story ideas. But this is not a writing issue. This is a contract issue. Obviously, they needed to have the book completed because they had him sign a contract. They were going to publish the book, but they also needed to get it out on time so that they could get it onto shelves. And so it was already being delayed long enough that they had to put the other book out first. So clearly this was under the pump. It was being rushed. It was being finished by a second editor, and they didn't want to go back to the original writer because they already had a strained contract with him. So there was a whole lot else going on that probably caused these errors. I can't even say, as a writer, try to avoid doing this, because it wasn't something that a writer did. It's something that the publisher did with their editors. Even the part that makes this, in my eyes, quite bad. So even though I say it's just kind of a meh book, I personally hate it because it doesn't have a point. There's no reason to write this story because it doesn't have anything to say besides, well, if you're fighting clay monsters, maybe wet them, I guess? Oh, side note, I'm glad that they actually did soak them with water to kill them. After 2 stories in a row where the way to kill the monster was to dry it out, I was worried that clay monsters would have to be killed by drying them out, so I was actually kind of glad that they instead went the opposite way and decided to soak them and turn them into sludge. But besides teaching me how to fight magic clay, which doesn't exist, what is the point of this story? About halfway through, it appeared like there was something to do with jealousy. Like, obviously Corey was jealous of his sister because she got a lot of attention because she was a really good artist. And so he obviously got this clay because he's jealous of his sister. And they even suggest that when his clay starts moving, even though they're lumpy and they look silly, when it starts moving, he's like, oh wow, it's got magic, and wow, you must be jealous because my monsters can move. You've just got silly little sculptures that sit on a shelf. But then when the idea comes that maybe his jealousy and his argument with his sister made the monsters evil, it's almost like they spit in the face of that idea by then showing that, well, even when the sister makes a monster and does it really well, it's also evil. Genuinely, I wonder if the original draft of this book did focus more on the jealousy thing. But obviously you can't do that because the book's been edited, and so we'll never know. So that's the thing. There's a lot about this book that's so frustrating. And so some of the stuff is bad enough that I'd think, you know, I really do hate this book. But it's not really anything I can do anything about or talk about because it wasn't really the author's fault. So, I mean, I still think this book is just a D+, but the main reason why is because you probably should make authors write their stories, not let someone else try to do it for them, because when they do, I mean, you get a D+. But, as is always the case, I don't want to leave it there. There's still stuff that we can learn from this, and I think there's two main things that stuck with me. One of them I found fascinating, but I think it's very true, and that is that plot holes do matter. Making sure that you've got a story that makes sense from start to finish does matter, because even though I couldn't quite articulate what was wrong with the story when I first read it, I still felt like something was off. Something wasn't sitting right, and it only took a little bit more thought than this book would expect of its reader to realize that they'd gotten the entire layout of the house wrong. See, as a writer, I usually make sure that I've done all of my research. I try to do as much effort as I can to make things realistic, well, within the realms of what matters in the story. Obviously, when I start involving magic and monsters, I'm fine with letting that stuff get a little bit outlandish. But I try to make stuff as real as I can, because I'm worried that I'm writing this book for all kinds of readers, and if someone who reads this book is, let's say, an expert in forensics, then if I offhandedly mention something that doesn't make any sense, something like gunshot residue being found underwater or something ridiculous like that, then obviously that reader will be upset. And so that's why I used to worry about plot holes and making sure that things were as realistic as possible, because I didn't want to make people who were smart get punished for reading my book because it was dumb. But I think this shows that it's a lot more than that, because it's not just about people who have that knowledge, it's that people have an innate sense of things. People have a basic empathy. Like, the reason I feel these kids didn't feel right, even though I can't quite articulate why, is because I have family and friends that I empathize with, who I feel with, who I've seen act before, and so when someone acts in a way that doesn't feel human, even if it made sense to the person writing the story, it still makes the story feel off to that reader. And I'm not even saying that you need to understand child psychology upside down and inside out, and I'm not saying that you need to create a perfect map of your house every time, but even something as simple as drawing 3 squares on a bit of paper and saying living room, lounge, kitchen, entry, or whatever, that would have made it so much easier for this story not to fall into that simple, silly little trap. And yeah, I recognize that means you're going to have to do a little bit more research, put in a little bit more effort when writing, but as I always like to say, if you can't put in the effort to write your story properly, why do you expect me to put in the effort to read it? And now, my second bit of advice, this one particularly for the writers out there, if you sometimes struggle to get ideas, or you have often heard people ask writers that age-old question, where do you get your ideas from? Well, here's a little hint for you. Here's a little lesson about where ideas can come from. So, obviously, they can come from life, they can come from all kinds of places, but one place I like to go if I'm looking for ideas is bad stories. And I feel okay saying that, because David is not to blame for this one. The author is not the main reason this story is not as good as it could be. But with a story like this, as I said at the very beginning, I couldn't think of a way to make clay thematically relevant, because it's just a lump. It doesn't mean anything unless you put something into it. But after thinking about it, after doing it literally whilst doing the voiceover for this, I realized that what they were hinting at with the whole jealousy thing is literally that. It's the idea that clay is just a lump, and you need to put something into it to make it mean anything, and the fact that one person put hatred and jealousy into it is what made it a potential monster. Now, that wasn't actually in the story, because they kind of spat in the face of that, like I said, but to me that's an interesting idea. You take something that seems like it doesn't have any meaning, but because of that lack of meaning, the meaning of the story is that what you put into it is what it becomes. But my point is that when you want to come up with ideas, a lot of writers tend to also be editors. They tend to have to read their own work and fix it. And so I find that most writers, once they've got that sort of storytelling mind, when they read a bad story, they can't help but have their mind try to fix it, try to make it into a story that would be good, because they can see what's wrong with it and then see how they could make it a good story. And you might think that that means all you'd ever write would be parody and homage, but that's not true. One of my favorite ideas I came up with, Donald Malcolm Blackwater. The whole idea is that he's a horror investigator. He investigates monsters and the occult and all kinds of different psychic phenomena, but the reason I came up with that idea is because I was watching a really bad horror movie. And in it, the characters kept saying ridiculous things like, oh, maybe it could be this, maybe it could be that. Oh, this thing happened that is obviously supernaturally influenced. Maybe it was a wild animal attack. And I just couldn't help but think, if a single smart detective walked into this scene, even if they weren't aware of every occult matter in the world, they could easily point out, well, that man was ripped in half. That's not something that animals do. Obviously, there's something supernatural afoot. So that's how I came up with this idea of what if there was a detective who could walk into a horror movie and be able to know what caused it. But of course, the problem with a detective doing that is a detective is there to find the answers. That doesn't mean he can fight the monster. So that was an interesting idea I came up with just because I watched a bad movie and thought of a way to fix it. Just like I read this book and found a way that I would fix it, or I guess in a way found a way that the original author would have written it had they not changed it on him. That's part of the reason why I have some of these Chapter Spooks books. Even though I do enjoy them 90% of the time, when I get a bad one, sometimes it inspires an idea. So that's my advice to you. Don't go looking up good stories because they're already good enough. Your mind can't fix that. And also I think there's less issues with taking a story that's bad and improving it, whereas if you take something that's beloved and then ruin it, I mean, do I even need to mention? I mean, just look at all of the remakes that Hollywood does today and how there's often a huge backlash if it's not faithful to the original canon. But seriously, if you're looking for a good idea, check out a bad story and see if your brain will fix it for you. But hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.